The dopaminergic defense hypothesis was presented in some detail last year. It offers neurobiological insights into the transformations claimed by many, as well as the consistent claims of psychological harm as a result of LGAT participation. In summary, the hypothesis is based on the following observations. LGATs tend to involve significant psychological stress for the first few days. On the final day of the seminar, the stress is replaced with love, affirmation, and social reward, and this appears to elicit a transformational experience in most participants. The dopaminergic defense hypothesis notes the findings that psychological stress causes an elevation in dopamine and makes the dopaminergic system more sensitive to rewards. It also notes that rewarding events result in an elevation of dopamine. In summary, LGATs are theoretically very well designed to elicit an elevation in dopamine. Given that LGATs have a theoretical impact on dopamine, it's useful to carefully consider the effects of participation. My research shows that what LGATs describe and market as a transformation involves the following effects: a positive view of oneself, the world, and the future, so rose-tinted glasses, a sense of euphoria or joy or aliveness, confidence, sociability, expansiveness, energy, productivity, decisiveness, and often a claim of creativity. The claimed negative effects include psychosis, hypermanic or manic type symptoms, including impulsivity, so excessive spending, abrupt divorces, risk-taking, a sense of overconfidence, quitting jobs, reckless sharing of personal information, that sort of thing. Then we see mood instability, claims of depression, and even suicide, and then even notes of things like post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, and other stress-related illnesses. These positive effects all align with an elevation in dopamine, or what Jaak Panksepp might describe as arousal of the seeking system. As per the dopamine hypothesis of bipolar disorder, these effects also all line up with the symptoms of hypermania and mania. These negative effects could also be explained by an elevation in dopamine or by acute or chronic stress. Elevated dopamine is associated with psychosis and mania. Stressful events are associated with depression, and chronic stress has been associated with dopamine depletion and depression. One might ask why most participants appear to experience transformation, while others might respond in more extreme ways. It's important to remember that participants have different histories. They've been through different things. They are likely to have different social networks and support structures. They will have different psychological coping mechanisms, and they'll have different biological makeups. While participants ostensibly go through the same process, they may therefore experience different levels of stress for a multitude of reasons, and their bodies and brains may respond to that stress in different ways. Consider as a simple example how a person who's experienced rape might respond to discussions about rape compared to a person who has not. Given these factors, is it possible to adequately screen participants for an LGAT, or for them to self-screen if they don't know what it will involve? Assuming a normal distribution of stress responses among participants and assuming dopamine elevation or depletion in response to stress, one might therefore expect the majority to experience the right level of stress and dopamine elevation, what these seminars will refer to as transformation. We might then also expect some participants to experience little to no dopamine elevation and feel that they got little out of participation. Then you'll have some participants experiencing quite extreme dopamine elevation or depletion, and then some who experience very extreme dopamine elevation or depletion. Given the argument that LGAT transformation and harm is caused by stress followed by reward, it's reasonable to ask how the stress and reward are generated. There are a number of ways that LGATs achieve this. Firstly, for the duration of the LGAT, participants will be in a state of uncertainty because the people that recruited them were explicitly told not to reveal any details about what takes place. At the start of the LGAT, participants must also agree to numerous restrictive rules which necessitate self-control and create a sense of powerlessness. Then, over several days, participants will become physically, cognitively, and emotionally exhausted. LGATs last several days. The hours are very long, an enormous volume of confusing information is presented. They can't discuss this information with anyone, and they can't take any notes. It's not unusual for days to start at 9 in the morning and end after midnight. Additionally, they're given homework, and so participants leave the seminars late. They may be highly stimulated from the activities, they may find it difficult to sleep, and so they will grow increasingly exhausted as time passes. Exercises in the seminar also often involve addressing difficult situations or reflecting on things participants find distressing. There's pressure on participants to get complete with people, which means reconcile, even if those people have caused them significant harm. This might be considered an extreme and irresponsible form of exposure therapy in many cases. Then the pressure to recruit others is immense. It should be noted that after participants complete with various people, they are told to recruit these people to participate in the LGAT. The last three elements are the most overtly stressful. Firstly, the treatment of participants by the trainers is often what an outsider might reasonably describe as abusive. LGATs and their supporters will sometimes refer to this treatment as tough love, ruthless compassion, or some other term which distorts the way it is perceived. Secondly, LGATs often involve guided visualization exercises, which ask participants to focus on painful memories and distressing thoughts. Finally, LGATs ask participants to share often highly traumatic incidents, then assert that participants are simply interpreting these incidents as traumatic and are therefore entirely responsible for the suffering they have endured. I'll provide a couple of examples of declining social status or the treatment by trainers to make the point. Stanford University researchers Finkelstein, Vinogradov, and Yalom explain, for example, that S trainers ridiculed participants, devalued their accomplishments, repeatedly referred to them as assholes, and told them that their lives were dysfunctional. Researchers Janice Harkin and Richard Adams say this of the LifeSpring training. Exercises which mobilize narcissistic defenses, i.e. feelings of inflated well-being and exaggerated personal power, were alternated with attacking exercises which were narcissistically injurious. The latter invoked feelings of shame and worthlessness and made the group vulnerable to the judgments of the leader. Journalist James O'Brien says this of the current LGAT. The leader's pale face has gone paler. His voice is taut with urgency. I think I see spit flying. He is a master of dispersed eye contact, and it is as if he is speaking to everyone and no one. Throughout this harangue, he repeatedly insists that none of us, not a single one of us, has even a shred of integrity. Our word is worthless. We are dishonest. His voice rising, he says again, you have no integrity. Journalist Amelia Hill provides a very similar description. We're still taking our seats when Jerry begins shouting. We're ugly people, disgusting. Our behavior is entirely governed by a need to look good, which makes us liars, fakes, and frauds. You're disgusting, he shouts. You just don't realize quite how disgusting you are yet. He pauses, but you're just about to find out. His timing is impeccable. We've hardly woken up, and we're already hanging on his every word. This morning, he says, he is going to force our resistant minds to recognize how fetid and mean our personalities are. He shouts, he mocks, he refuses to let us ask questions. He tells us we're liars and ridicules the stories we tell about our own lives. Okay, and now I'll provide a couple of examples of how LGATs ask participants to focus on painful memories and distressing thoughts, often from childhood. Journalist Mark Fisher says this about the LifeSpring basic training. There are guided fantasies in which the lights are turned down, trainees sit on the floor, and Jim tells a story over a sentimental pop song, asking everyone to conjure up troubling childhood memories. This journalist describes an exercise called the fear exercise used in current LGATs. The next exercise will get to me. Alan Roth asks us to close the eyes and imagine the two people on either side as being potentially dangerous. Let the fear enter your body, your breathing, your gut, he orders. You're trying to escape, but there's nowhere to go. Some people break. I hear tears and tremors around me. Another journalist describes the response to this exercise as follows. Someone in the room lets out a primal wail. A woman 2 rows in front of me has covered her head with her jacket, another is shaking her head furiously. Others are writhing around and stamping their feet. The moaning gets louder, and more join in. Someone screams, "I want my mommy." Another hollers, "Leave me alone." Richard's voice gets louder and more frantic as he describes the quality of the fear we're supposed to be feeling. Possibly the most problematic of the stress-generating exercises in LGATs is the process of sharing and then asking participants to take responsibility. I'll provide a couple of examples of this. Dr. Margaret Singer, who participated in several LGATs, read the manuals of a number of these LGATs and interviewed participants and trainers, says the following. The well-known LGATs claim that you've caused everything that ever happened to you, from choosing your parents to breaking your leg, from getting yourself jilted to having been molested by your stepfather as a child. Trainers use the terms accountable and responsible, but not with their ordinary meaning. Trainers mean that you will, if you get it, start to make choices patterned after the way the organization advocates. They create guilt and fear in you that you have created all the bad things that have ever happened in your life. Janice Harkin and Richard Adams say this of the LifeSpring basic training. An exercise designed to illustrate the theme of taking full responsibility involved the use of pairs. Several people told stories about having been beaten by a parent as a child. We were then instructed to retell the story from a position of 100% accountability. In other words, how we set things up to be that way. Mark Brewer of Psychology Today says this: "It's your own fault." Gradually, Tony moved on to another mainstay in the EST body of knowledge, the idea of taking responsibility for your life. It's basically the perception that your problems aren't caused by sickness or fate or other people. They're caused by you, and until you accept that, you'll never solve any of them. Not surprisingly, almost everyone in the room had an example of some exception in his own case, but Tony would have none of it. He wouldn't have cared if he'd been gang raped or born with a brain defect. It was no goddamn excuse. Again, we see the same mentality in existing LGATs. Richard explains that what happens to us has no effect on our lives. It's all about our interpretation of what happened. A young woman named Kim takes the microphone and talks about her abusive, alcoholic father. Richard tells her she's suffering now from her interpretation of her father's actions. She breaks down and sobs. Richard tells her it's a racket. Roland Howard of the Daily Mail reveals how extreme this thinking can be. But it's only on the second day, when a young man comes to the microphone, that my misgivings turn to anger. He tells us with tears streaming down his face that he had been raped by his brother for most of his childhood. He had taken David's advice the day before and phoned his brother to create a breakthrough. "I was willing to give up the pain for a good relationship," he says. His brother had put down the phone. David urges him to phone again. "Rape is interpretation. Brutality is interpretation," he says. He had to forgive him. "Get off your guilt and grow up," he snaps. Finally, blogger Jules Evans reveals that these sorts of interactions happen with some regularity. And throughout the 3 days, various people stood up, shaking with rage, and revealed all the terrible things that had happened to them that meant they couldn't do whatever they wanted to. People had been raped or abused, or one person had killed their father by mistake, and the leader would shout back at them and ridicule them for their self-pity or hypocrisy or whatever, until eventually they accepted the leader's point of view, had a breakthrough, and converted to a new way of seeing reality. In summary, over a period of several days, LGAT conditions and processes are likely to generate a great deal of stress in participants, and we understand that this may both elicit an elevation of dopamine and make the dopamine system more sensitive to rewards that follow. It's been claimed that LGATs elicit stress for the first few days, but then on the final day of the seminar and at the graduation, participants are treated with love and kindness, that there's an abrupt shift from being treated like arseholes by the trainers to being treated as if they're highly valued. The argument is that the trainer, who comes to be seen as the ultimate authority or parental figure, starts treating participants really well towards the end of the LGAT. Participants are showered with love by the trainer, by fellow participants, and at the graduation by former graduates, family and friends. There's lots of hugging and dancing and indications that participants have graduated, are accepted, and are whole. The next couple of slides will provide examples of this. Describing an interaction between an S trainer and participants, author Luke Reinhardt says, "For 2 days now," he says, "looking as bright-eyed, alive, and high as the trainees, I've been playing the role of trainer, and you've been playing the role of trainee. And now I'm going to step down from the platform and return to playing the game of Michael, God pretending he's a human, interacting with you other gods." Journalist Mark Fisher provides an excellent example of the shift in treatment by a LifeSpring trainer. "Less than 10 hours after leaving the hotel, we're back. The music ends and here's Jim. He's not wearing a jacket or even a tie today, and he jumps up on the stage, smiling this grin of supreme goodness, this beatific smile, and we, who were scum just hours ago, are now the most wonderful group of people he has ever beheld." Finally, we have 3 journalists independently describing how their formerly hostile trainers spoke to them at their graduation. It's worth noting just how similar these accounts are. Firstly, we have Rosemary Mahoney of New York Magazine. She says, "As she's saying goodbye, Handel's own eyes fill up with tears. With her hands in the position of prayer, she says, 'It was a privilege to serve you.'" Then we have Laura McClure of Mother Jones Magazine. "David tears up for the 3rd time in 2 hours. 'I love you forever,' he tells us. If you ever wonder if someone loves you, the answer is yes, David loves you." Finally, we have Karen Batt of the Huffington Post. She says, "Sophie had tears in her eyes as she thanked us for letting her serve us."